They say that only the truth can set you free, but at the same time, have you observed how painful it is to listen to the truth? Christopher Columbus, the great explorer that history has graced with a badge of honor, might not have been the one who discovered the great Americas after all. Some people even go as far as saying that this guy might have been a figment in somebody's imagination, as in somebody might have come up with this philosophical character known as Christopher Columbus, hence rendering the perception that he discovered America a lie. And this, my friends, opens the door to some intriguing questions. Questions like, why in the world do we learn about him, and who lied to us? The following videos are gonna add some details to this new perspective about this figure, and after that we're gonna have a discussion about some intriguing takeaways from today's topic. And before we get started, tell me if you had some information concerning Christopher Columbus, and if you did, tell me exactly what you think about why they make us believe in all these phenomenons and historical figures that might have been a lie after all.
Christopher Columbus did not discover America. How you can discover a place where the inhabitants are watching you arrive from the shore. There are actually, in southeastern Mexico, there are 18 rock statues that of heads up to 11 feet tall that are facing the ocean, looking east. Now, archaeologists call them the Olmec and date from at least 900 BCE when they were mysteriously buried for some reason. The smallest one was 6 tons, so 6 to 50-ton blocks, to quarry them and carry them 75 miles away from the quarry, and then carve them and then erect them. Jose Megler Serrano, the archaeologist who first uncovered them, he pointed out that facial features look amazingly like African blacks. Look at how close this is. White people don't think that you could go this is closer compared to more than twice the distance that Columbus sailed. Which state is closest to Africa? Maine. Yeah, geometry. Science. There you go.
A great deal of research has been done. One has become aware of far more things that have emerged from excavations that help to confirm with almost an absoluteness what we have advanced in the past, that there were Africans in America before Columbus. They came to America not as slaves but as masters. I am not the first to suggest there were Africans in America before Columbus, nor is anyone in the modern period. Columbus is the first man to suggest it. In his diaries, and there is a marvelous book, a huge book, a trilogy in fact, published in 1904 by John Boyd Thatcher, 3 volumes. It covers more than 1,200 pages, which deals with all the diaries and voyages and journals of Columbus, in which he points out that on his second voyage, Native Americans of Haiti, which was then known as Hispaniola, came to him and told him that black people had come in large boats from the south and the southeast, trading with the Americans in gold-tipped metal spears. Columbus did not believe this, perhaps, but he did a very cautious thing, which is very important to us, in that he sent samples of these metal spears back to Spain. And they were assayed, they were examined by the Spanish metallurgists, and they ruled that these spears had the same ratio of gold, silver, and copper alloys as spears then being forged in African Guinea. Furthermore, the Portuguese told Columbus when he returned from his first voyage, the Portuguese told Columbus that they were aware of Africans leaving from the Cape Verde Islands and going far to the west with merchandise in large boats. There are 2 things to bear in mind here. First of all, the Portuguese were aware of African navigation because the Portuguese had been in Africa since around 1450. They in fact had clashed with the Gambian Navy. The Portuguese also were aware of a landmass to the south as a result of African movements. Botanical evidence, but the navigational evidence shows, the oceanographic survey of the ocean shows that just off the Cape Verde there is a current that takes you to South America. There are three major currents off Africa, about 100 miles off the African coast, that take you automatically to America. Once you are caught in those currents, whether you planned it or not, you have to get to America unless the fish get through first.
The myth of race has to be maintained at all costs in this country, because if white people have to give up the color of their skin as being something that makes them perfect, what do they have left? If we start teaching the truth about history, if we start teaching about Nile Valley contributions to civilization, it will totally change the way we conduct ourselves in the classroom. It will have to. Columbus didn't discover America. You can't discover a place where people are already living. But we celebrate that every October. It's a lie. We need to get over. We need to stop telling the myths and start telling the truth.
It's about time somebody exposes this fake history they've been teaching us for years and years in school. Let's start with this American hero, Christopher Columbus. Matter of fact, let's take it way back. It actually starts with this guy, King Ferdinand, who was the king of Aragon in 1479. He married Queen Isabella, who was the Queen of Castile. Now this led to the unification of Spain in 1469. Now Columbus was an entrepreneur trying to find a way to get to Asia from Europe. Instead of going east over land, he wanted to go west. Everybody looked at Columbus like because everyone believed the earth was flat. They believed if you went west, you would fall off the edge of the world. But Columbus was determined to make this trip happen. But the big issue is that he didn't really have anything to make this trip happen. He needed ships, tools, resources, and a whole crew. Now Columbus first went to King John, who was the king of Portugal, and he looked at Columbus like and said no. Columbus then spent 6 years trying to convince King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella to let him do this trip, because once again he needed funding to make this happen. The king and queen eventually said yes and gave him 3 ships, supplies, and a crew. Now after about 2 months of sailing, Columbus and his crew eventually found what we know now as the Bahamas. And for those next 5 months, they just kept exploring the land. I'ma be straight up right now and tell you this guy did not discover ish, bro. People were already on the land. The Native Americans and indigenous people. Him and his crew kidnapped the Native Americans, killed them, and raped the women and children. In 1493, he went back to Spain, telling everyone that he discovered a new land, and this news spread fast, bro. So fast that many explorers and settlers followed right after him. He made sure to tell his people that the Native Americans had no weapons, were full of fear, and easy to be controlled. He knew Spain could easily conquer these people. He also proposed to use Christianity to get the remaining natives on board to love the king and the queen and all their people. I'm gonna say about 90% of the indigenous and native people that were there were, bro. The purpose of Columbus's trip was to find a new way to Asia. Yet he found a whole new place and conquered it, bro. After being conquered, the remaining of them were tortured for not bringing them enough gold. Young native girls at just the age of 9 were sold into sexual slavery. Columbus even provided you-know-what slaves to his men. Over 3 million natives from war, slavery, and who knows what else. A lot of history is a lie. History is just his story told from the side of the winners, the conquerors. It makes me happy seeing a lot of states change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, because this guy was not a hero. And that's just a little bit of tea. If y'all want a part 2, make sure you like, follow, and save this video.
People like Christopher Columbus reminds me of the people that we meet in our daily lives. The cunning individuals that make you sign an agreement, make you review terms and conditions that they later shift and change or alter later after you just realize that you signed an agreement with a person likened to the devil himself, a manipulative and deceitful individual. The reason why I emphasize greatly on this point is because just imagine how Christopher Columbus, for the people to be able to trust him with the information to do with their culture and their way of life. And in the videos we just watched, we heard how Christopher Columbus even made a report to the people that had sent him saying that these people were no threat and his people can now prepare themselves to travel overseas to this new land that he had found for them. And from Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, we're able to see his cunning and manipulative nature as an entrepreneur and how he managed to convince them. The brother said after 6 years, I think that's what he said. You're able to see the cunning nature of him manifesting after a long time. Now, the question is, what exactly did he ask of this king and this queen or promise them for him to be able to have this investment that they gave to him with all these ships and a crew for him to be able to travel to this new land? Because we're laying a foundation foundation for us to be able to understand and grasp the concept of this entity or individual known as Christopher Columbus. I don't know how familiar you are with a business pitch and how individuals from their own ideas are able to create a business pitch that entices the audience and captures the investor's attention. With that perspective in mind, imagine an individual in the old days with the audacity to approach a king and a queen to ask for this favor. Do you know how connected you had to be in those days for you to be able to pull something like this? And even after his proposal got rejected, he still stayed there until he was able to convince them, waiting for months upon months. Now, after they granted his request, he embarked on this journey in search of spices, but ended up stumbling upon a land and he conquered it eventually. Let's look at how Christopher Columbus was able to pull this off with the indigenous people. So the ability of cunning or manipulative individuals to gain trust and influence over others, even to the extent of colonization, can be attributed to several psychological and sociological factors. The first one is charisma and persuasion. Cunning individuals often possess charisma and persuasive skills that enable them to charm and manipulate others. They may use smooth talk, flattery, and charisma to win people's trust and convince them of their intentions, even if they are ultimately self-serving. The second one is exploiting vulnerabilities. Manipulative individuals often exploit the vulnerabilities of others, such as economic hardship, political instability, or social divisions. By offering solutions to problems or promising a better future, they can gain support from those who feel marginalized or oppressed. The other one is false promises and deceptions. Manipulative individuals are adept at making false promises and deceiving others about their true intentions. They may promise prosperity, protection, and advancement in exchange for loyalty or cooperation, even if they have no intention of fulfilling these promises in the long run. The fourth one is creating dependency. Manipulative individuals may create dependency relationships with others, whereby they control access to resources, information, or opportunities by establishing themselves as indispensable or benevolent figures. They can manipulate others into relying on them for support or guidance. And the fifth one is cultural hegemony. In the context of colonization, cunning individuals of colonial powers may impose their cultural norms, values, and beliefs on indigenous populations, thereby shaping their perceptions and behaviors. This cultural hegemony can make colonized people more susceptible to manipulation and control by the colonizers. Overall, the ability of cunning or manipulative individuals to gain people's trust and even colonize them stems from a combination of psychological tactics, exploitation of vulnerabilities, and the unequal power dynamics inherent in colonialism and imperialism. So from this information, we're able to see that after observing how vulnerable some corners or some areas of this culture of the indigenous people were, he devised plans on how to conquer them and colonize them eventually. And the other important aspects of this discussion were the psychological and sociological impacts that this cunningness or manipulative nature of people like Christopher Columbus had and still has up to this date to the marginalized communities that were colonized and conquered by the colonizers themselves. And a very good example of this psychological exchange is in the way the palm coloreds portray themselves, even up to date. When they come to an African country, they feel entitled to own land in that land, even though they don't provide the proper papers and the proper documentation for owning that land. But because they feel entitled and they have the understanding of who their ancestors are, and on our side, they understand the psychological and sociological exchange or agreement that was made in history, we grant them this supernatural power because they believe that there's an impact that their ancestors had and still have with us as marginalized and as black people. Hence, we respond to them in a way that they expect us to. And that is the reason why in another video I said racist and discrimination is still present up to this day, because we expect it from these guys whenever we come in contact with them. Whenever you meet the palm colored in a store, you expect him or you think of him as being an racist person because his ancestors introduced that to our cultures, and on a sociological level, it reverberates and resonates in us because it's what we experienced and what we were taught in our families. And that is the reason why I'm emphasizing mostly on the manipulative nature of the colonizers, because as much as the physical impacts were felt by our people, the most impactful thing is the psychological nature of it. Because in order for parents to prepare their young ones for racial discrimination, they would teach them and make them aware of the racial slurs in the marginalized communities. And here in Africa, where our countries were colonized, our parents would tell us to be very careful with palm coloreds, especially when they're giving gifts to to you like sweets. And why is this perspective important? Well, because Christopher Columbus might be long gone, but his colonialist ways still reverberate today in most African countries. Our headmen and chiefs today give away land to palm coloreds, and community members wonder why. Well, the previous discussion that we've had on the manipulative nature of this man is the reason why palm coloreds even up today still hold power over our own things. And that is why when starting this discussion, I pointed to the fact that some manipulative people make you sign agreements that they later stop adhering to. This is very important because the psychological impacts of racist and discrimination have this nature of an agreement that was made before we were born. And I started becoming aware of this manipulative nature of colonialists that we rarely hear of from history books when I was watching this video from a palm colored in South Africa, where the South Africans were demanding that these people leave their land and their country. Now, this man, this palm color man, boldly said that if you are expecting us to leave without compensation, then forget it, you're calling for a civil war. This is a recent discussion that you're gonna find on TikTok or on Facebook. It is happening right now in 2024. I found this intriguing because I did not understand where the palm color was basing this boldness from. But because of this theory that we've had a discussion on, we are seeing that this is a psychological agreement that was made before even these palm colors were born. It's an agreement between our people and their people, and how our ancestors signed an agreement that was not a physical one, and we're feeling its impact up to date. Now, before you get confused of how a non-physical agreement can impact a people later in the future, just look at what happened between Eve and the serpent and how God granted mankind dominion. But because of the exchange that took place between man and the serpent, even though to the man he was unaware of exactly what was happening in the spiritual realm or in the laws of God, man ended up giving his kingdom to Satan. Now, that was a discussion on the manipulative nature of Christopher Columbus and why we still attribute all the major contributions in history to the colonial masters themselves, because it's a psychological exchange that we may not be aware of because it's only apparent on a psychological level. And even though there were some black people that may have discovered the Americas, those major contributions were attributed to the later colonialist master Christopher Columbus because of this psychological exchange that we grapple with in today's society. With that being said, leave your thoughts in the comment section concerning any contributions that you might have towards today's discussion. I will see you in the next video. Please like this video, share it, and subscribe. My viewers, thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.